Hi everyone. For our 445 term project, our topic is net neutrality. So here's the agenda for the presentation. First, we're going to talk a little bit about internet service providers, then a quick intro to what net neutrality is. Then we're going to relate it to the internet protocol stack and other course concepts. Then we're going to talk about data centers and net neutrality. Rusty has a really exciting Netflix walkthrough that he wants to do. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the laws around the world, especially in Canada and the US, regarding net neutrality. So, first things first, what is an internet service provider? Basically, it's a network of networks, and there's various tiers to it. All content is delivered through websites, and the communication speeds vary by each ISP, and ISPs are all managed independently. So here's an image of the most common Canadian ISPs. Most of us are probably a user of one of their services. So what are Tier 1 ISPs? Tier 1 are the backbone of internet networks. They have high link speeds, which can be up to many gigabytes per second. These routers can forward packets at high rates. All Tier 1 ISPs are interconnected, and they're connected to many Tier 2 ISPs, which is just one tier below, and they have international coverage. So Verizon and Sprint are examples. So this image is just to show that all Tier 1 ISPs are all interconnected and interlinked with each other. So this image is really showing how the ISPs are connected, and they're also connected to different content distributors like Google, for example. So what are Tier 2 ISPs? They provide regional or national coverage, and they connect to only a few Tier 1 ISPs. Tier 2 ISPs are a customer of Tier 1 ISPs, and they even pay them. Lower tier ISPs are connected to Tier 2 ISPs, and the ISPs at the very bottom are access ISPs. ISPs connect at a point which is called the point of presence. So this is just to show how ISPs can go into many tiers. This graphic shows how each Tier 1 ISP is connected to a few Tier 2 ISPs. This image is just to show that at the very bottom there are the access ISPs. This image just shows that all the different ISPs connect at the point of presence, which is, in this case, you have 3 of them. So what is the end-to-end principle? In order to understand net neutrality, we need to understand this. So the end-to-end principle is that information pushed into one end of the internet should come out the other end without any modification or any changes to it. The internet should not modify any data packets as they move throughout the network. Network features should be implemented as close to the endpoints of the network as possible. Lessig and McChesney are two American professors who know a lot about networking, and they teach at Harvard and Stanford Law School. And they're saying that all of the intelligence is held by the producers and users, not the network that connects them. So this image shows how the end-to-end principle works. And let's say Alice wants to send something to Bob. So this just shows how the data will flow uninterruptedly from Alice to Bob, going throughout from all the way from the application stage down to the ISP, which is the backbone, and it will reach Bob, and it has not been modified or changed or manipulated in any way. So what is net neutrality? It's the idea that all transmitted data must be treated equally by ISPs. No data is limited or restricted. All data has equal speeds of transmission, and this completely adheres to the end-to-end principle. Who are the stakeholders for this? There are the ISPs, governments, and the general public. So now let's talk about net neutrality and the networking model. So out of all the layers, it affects layer 3, the network layer, the most. The network layer deals with routing packets from a source IP address to the destination IP address. It also affects the transport layer, layer number 4, which delivers data to and from specific processes on machines. This includes protocols like TCP and UDP. Next, it also affects the application layer, which is the topmost layer, which represents data for certain applications, including HTTP. Normally, an ISP transporting data only deals with the network, link, and physical layers. So repealing net neutrality. ISPs can slow down certain website speeds. Companies can pay ISPs to boost the speed of their websites. And this leads to a gap between small and large companies. Large companies can pay a lot of money, millions and billions of dollars, whereas small businesses cannot do that. Consumers end up spending more on internet packages to have full access to all websites, whereas with net neutrality, they don't have to do that. Governments can suppress certain sites by slowing speeds. This can be a direct threat to free speech, access to information, and many authoritarian leaders do things like this. It reduces access to competitor services and tools, which can eliminate competition, leading to a duopoly or monopoly. And it can also restrict advertisements for competitors while they show their own. So what does repealing net neutrality mean? It means that the control of the internet is passed to ISPs. This violates the end-to-end principle. This could actually break up the whole modularity of the layered networking model. ISPs would have to decide how much to charge and what content users have access to. And they can even narrow it down to the very exact website. They can also charge consumers and producers for fast content, making money from both ends. So this image is just to show on the left what net neutrality is, where you have equal speeds, equal access to those websites, and they're using a highway as an example. All the cars are moving in about the same speed. On the right, you have what happens if net neutrality is repealed. You have certain fast lanes or toll roads. These could be maybe the faster speeds, or the richer companies, the companies with more money who can pay to have that access, whereas you have the slow lane, which people have to drive slower. Maybe they have different rules that apply to them, and maybe they're not paying as much for that. So let's talk about repealing net neutrality and the networking model. The very nature of internet would change. Right now, we can assume that we type any website and it will work. However, without net neutrality, we'd have to be cautious of how our ISP handles web traffic or how they route packets of certain protocols. Another issue is ISPs not being fully transparent. So this could be them being dishonest when it comes to talking about the speeds that they're going to provide, as well as their competitors and what companies are paying them for faster speeds. Another weird issue is our home ISPs can be different than our work ISPs, which means the content available to us at either home, work, or school could be different. Last, there could be a difference in speeds using desktop or phone even when connected to the same access point. So ISPs can even route HTTP traffic differently than FTP, and therefore ISPs would have to concern themselves more with the application layer than they normally do. Reducing connection speeds would happen in the network layer, which is layer 3. And different company routers can even charge for the devices you connect to. This affects the link layer. So for example, a Cisco router can potentially charge you if you're connecting to an Apple product, assuming they don't have those two businesses don't have that relationship, and net neutrality is repealed. So it may seem that maintaining net neutrality is a good thing and repealing it is a bad thing. However, there are some reasons why maybe we should repeal net neutrality. Number one, it gives ISPs more control over their own service or their own products. Number two is that it leads to higher revenues for ISPs, so they can spend more money on expanding the business or improving infrastructure and research and development. Next, there is less regulation for ISPs, so this can mean less bureaucracy and less paperwork to go through. Next is there's various pricing models that could lead to competition. Having to choose between multiple prices and data, and the more options you have, that could benefit you and actually give you a cheaper cost. And last is having the market run the internet. For a lot of people who believe in the free market, they want very little government intervention.
Data centers and net neutrality. To describe the effect of net neutrality on data centers, let's look at this technology example. IoT and AI technology rely heavily on the ability to store and access large quantities of data. Without net neutrality, ISPs could charge increased rates for reliable transfer of data to and from these types of devices. In turn, this technology becomes less attractive to end users, and technological development in these areas is negatively impacted and stifled as a result.
Hello, I am going to be talking about Netflix with net neutrality and without net neutrality. Basically, this section is going to be me going through the average, oversimplified a little bit, use cases that happen with Netflix and how net neutrality affects them. And in this example, I'm going to be going through how it currently works in Canada with net neutrality. So, when you go to use the service Netflix, you make an HTTP request. I highlighted service here because I think it's important to mention that Netflix does not have much physical servers at this point. They mostly use Amazon Web Services. And so whenever you access Netflix information, you're actually doing so from the boxes that are at ISPs, as I mentioned earlier. It's a system called OpenConnect that they have now, where all of the video information, like all of the movie files, are stored on site at an ISP's like server headquarters. And whenever you ask for Netflix content, it doesn't stream from Netflix servers. It streams from your ISP directly to you, and that's how you manage to get such a good, clean, stable connection with Netflix with very few interruptions. The reason why I'm highlighting this specifically for neutrality is that it is from a good faith interaction with the ISP that Netflix is able to provide such a good service to all of its subscribers. And without that good faith, the service gets a lot worse. As you can see from the next section, where we talk about how Netflix works without net neutrality. A similar thing, but at this point, ISPs can now identify when information coming in that they have to route is Netflix, and they can just straight up block it. Where otherwise they have to, no matter what it is, forward it. In this case, they can just arbitrarily say, if it's Netflix, if you're not paying for Netflix from the ISP, you just don't get access, regardless of whether or not you're paying for Netflix, the service. Not only can they completely block it, they can also block specific devices of yours. So let's say you get the PC Netflix plan, but you don't get the mobile Netflix plan or the media center, like a Roku Netflix plan. They can make it so that you could only use Netflix from your computer, and you would have to pay for more devices. Another thing the ISP could do without net neutrality is that they could also throttle your connection to Netflix. In this case, they can make it so the quality of the stream that you get from the box that the ISP has in their server room, they can arbitrarily lower the quality and make you pay to receive a higher quality through this connection. So let's say you actually pay for a really good internet speed, let's say like 50 megs down or something. The ISP could then say, "Oh, but you're not paying us for the Netflix high quality speed, so you're only getting a 720p broadcast." That's just a simple example of how using internet services can change with and without net neutrality. Against Portugal, which ironically enough does have net neutrality laws technically as part of the EU. In 2002, an EU law was written for net neutrality, but the law was vague enough that a lot of the characteristics we consider non-net neutral are actually allowed for within this law. As, for example, this was a very famous image that was going around when the States was having its issues with net neutrality. And as you can see here, you can buy 10 gigabytes of data from an ISP in Portugal for €5, but you're only allowed to use those 10 gigabytes for these brackets of services.
For a brief overview of the status of net neutrality around the world, let's take a look at the graphic we see on screen. Much of North and South America, as well as parts of Europe, are shown in a shade of blue. This denotes significant movement to protect net neutrality in these areas. Much of Europe, as well as India and Pakistan, are shown in red. This denotes that protections for net neutrality are under consideration in these areas. We see that Russia, China, and Burma are shown in gray, and this denotes that zero protections are in place for net neutrality in these areas. Now, let's take a closer look at recent movements in net neutrality surrounding both Canada and the USA. In 2014, then-President Barack Obama insisted that the Federal Communications Commission revise their policies to take the strongest possible stance to protect net neutrality. Their policies were presented in 2015 and were fully upheld in a federal court of appeals in 2016. However, in 2017, under the new Trump administration, the FCC moved to reverse the newly established regulations. Then, in 2019, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the FCC and the repeal of the Obama-era legislature. This poll carried out by Mozilla in 2017 shows that, in contrast to the stance taken by the federal government, there was significant public support for net neutrality from both Democratic and Republican voters. Legislature supporting net neutrality has existed in Canada since 1993 and has been improved iteratively along the way. Even early frameworks of law had some of the necessary provisions in place to protect net neutrality. Mainly, providers have always been considered as utilities, and therefore could not give preference to the resources they provided. Despite the protections established in Canada, policy changes in the US could still affect Canadian consumers. Many of today's biggest content providers are based in the USA, such as YouTube, Twitch, and Netflix, and if their business costs are to increase, those upcharges are likely to be shared between both American and Canadian consumers. Thank you very much for watching our presentation. Oh no,